Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Heart and Hand Virtual Book Talk. My name is Daniel Hernandez of LA County Library's Chicano Resource Center. Now, to help kick off today's program, we've prepared a short video about the history of National Hispanic Heritage Month. After the video, we'll go into introductions and begin today's conversation with Library Director Skye Patrick and our featured guest author, Annette Chavez Macias. Enjoy the program. Great. Well, hello, everyone, again. Thank you for tuning into today's Heart and Hand Virtual Book Talk. As I mentioned earlier, my name's Daniel Hernandez, and I am a librarian with LA County Library, and I oversee the Chicano Resource Center. The Resource Center was established in 1976 to serve the information needs of the Hispanic and Latino community and to make information about the history and culture of this group available to the general public. The Chicano Resource Center is extremely proud to feature a special National Hispanic Heritage Month edition of today's Heart and Hand Virtual Book Talk. The Heart and Hand Virtual Book Talk series was developed as part of our library's Equity Initiative. These talks feature engaging conversations with authors and other leaders about issues concerning equity, diversity, and inclusion. It is our hope that this series can inspire people to open their hearts and minds to learning about diverse experiences, structural racism, and the injustices against people of color. Tonight, we are featuring a conversation about celebrating authentic cultural representation in books. Leading tonight's conversation is our very own library director, Skye Patrick. Skye was appointed LA County Library Director in 2016. In her role, she is responsible for the library's 86 community libraries, an 18-vehicle mobile fleet, and resources that are used by more than 3.4 million customers across the county. Patrick is committed to breaking down barriers and increasing access for all. In addition to helping LA County Library go fine-free and initiating several other services to help provide more access and opportunity for customers, Patrick launched the library's iCount Equity Initiative. The initiative ensures that library services and programs address the needs of the diverse communities across LA County. Patrick continues to reinforce the library's role in the community as a civic and cultural center, a hub for public information, services, and discourse, and an institution of literacy, innovation, and lifelong learning. Tonight, Skye will be interviewing author Annette Chavez Macias. Annette writes stories about love, family, and following your dreams. She proudly infuses her Mexican-American heritage, culture, and tradition within the pages of her books. She is the author of the recently published book, Big Chicas Don't Cry, and Too Soon for Adios, which is scheduled to debut in March. For readers wanting even more love stories and guaranteed happily ever afters, Annette writes romance novels under the pen name Sabrina Soul. A Southern California native, Annette lives just outside of Los Angeles with her husband, 3 children, and 4 dogs. So thank you, Skye and Annette, for being here with us tonight. And I'll turn this over to you, Skye.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And I just want to welcome our author. I can't wait to have this conversation, but I do have a couple of things I need to say in advance of that. As Daniel mentioned, this is our 3rd Heart and Hand program, and we're really excited to be able to have this celebration of authentic cultural representation, especially during Hispanic Heritage Month. Before we get started, however, I would like to take an opportunity to pay tribute to a life and legacy of one of our greatest library supporters, Miss Evelyn Gutierrez, who passed away quietly this weekend. Evelyn was dedicated to the power of libraries. She was a fierce advocate for the East Los Angeles Library, as well as the San Gabriel Library. So if you could please join me for a moment of silence for her and her fierce love of learning and community service. Thank you so much. Okay, so National Hispanic Heritage Month, observed September 15th through October 15th, recognizes and celebrates the culture, contribution, and heritage of Hispanic Americans. The month of September and October covers a wide range of Independence Days for Latin American countries. Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua are all celebrate their independence on September 15th. Mexico celebrates its independence on September 16th. Chile on September 18th, Belize on September 21, and El Dia de las Raza, which is equivalent to the Columbus Day, is celebrated on October 12th. Hispanic Heritage Month was introduced in June 1968 by California Congressman George E. Brown under President Lyndon Johnson, and was later expanded by President Ronald Reagan in 1988 to cover a full 30-day period between September 15th and October 15th. Congressman Brown represented East Los Angeles and a large portion of the San Gabriel Valley, both heavily populated by members of the Hispanic and Latinx communities. He wanted to recognize the role played by those communities throughout American history, our history. So some of you may frequent these libraries, and you might be aware that East LA, City Terrace, Anthony Quinn, El Camino are all in East LA. Then we have some of our libraries in the San Gabriel Valley. Hopefully some of these are yours. Which is the San Gabriel Library, the Baldwin Park, Diamond Bar, Duarte, El Monte, La Cañada, Flint Ridge, La Puente, Montebello, Rosemead, and West Covina. I know that was a lot, Annette. Some of you may or may not be aware, but nearly 50% of residents in Los Angeles County identify as Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx. It's almost 5 million people. So we're super excited to offer this program. This is a virtual program, but we certainly have in-person programs at our libraries. And now, for the person we've all been waiting for, Miss Annette, I am so happy to welcome you to LA County. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here tonight and talk about, my book and my writing. So with all of you, and also celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month as well.
Thank you so much. We have so many questions for you. I'm going to do my best to get through them.
Sure.
And so that we can also hopefully reserve some time for our customers and our participants to ask you some questions. And Daniel will, I guess, man that portion of the program. So let's get started. Here's our first question for you, Annette. As we celebrate and honor Hispanic Heritage Month, can you share with our audience your background and how you channel it to showcase Mexican American experiences and heritage in your book?
Sure.
Plural.
So yeah. So I consider my heritage to be Mexican American. I was born in the United States. My dad was born in Mexico, and he came to the country when he was 18, 19 years old. I'm considered second generation Mexican American on my mom's side because she was born in the United States, but her parents and family were born also in Mexico, but they had they had lived in the United States for a while by the time my mom and my dad met. So I grew up, so I'm kind of like, in between first generation, second generation. So my upbringing is a little bit mixed when it comes to my heritage. So I definitely, when I started writing, they always tell you, write what you know. And so I wasn't necessarily setting out to write Mexican American stories or have Mexican American characters, but that's what I knew. That's what I grew up with, and that was me. So it was just natural for me to put my experiences and my traditions into my books. I think it would be difficult for me to not do that.
Yeah, sort of just disingenuous to not represent what you know. Yeah, exactly. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That's actually a great segue into our second question. So you have this new book, and I had the pleasure of reading some of it this afternoon. I have to be very honest with you. Sure. Recently published, called Big Chicas Don't Cry. And I actually think I read the part of the book where it was identified where big chicas don't actually cry. So can you talk to us about the inspiration behind this book and how you strive to capture the authentic cultural representation in it?
Sure. So the family inside that the book is about is a fictional family, but it's definitely inspired by my own family. As I mentioned, I come from a Mexican American family, a big Mexican American family. There's lots of cousins, tios. I was blessed to have my grandparents in my life for a long time. And so this book was actually the first book that I tried to write when I decided I wanted to become an author. Well, I had always wanted to be an author, but that when I was younger. And so I kind of put that dream aside, did other things. And it was kind of, I was going to hit 40 and I had a little bit of a midlife crisis. And I decided, you know what, let me try and be an author. So this was the first book that I tried. I had no idea what it meant to write a book. I actually Googled how many words does a novel have to be. And in my head, I was thinking, as long as I hit that landmark, then my book is going to be done. So
Annette, how many words? Enlighten me. How many?
80,000.
80,000 words.
Yes,
is like the standard, I guess.
Yes, for a full length novel. It varies by genre. So, like for example, science fiction, fantasy may actually go over 100,000. But so 80,000 was like on the low end, and so I was just trying to hit that number. But so I had this story in my head, and one night I had to write it down, and so that's pretty much how it started. I would work on it here and there in between, raising my family, working full time. And then I got into publishing as a romance author. So I had books published in romance, but I couldn't give this book up. So I kept coming back to it, and I think it was inspired by my experiences, my relatives' experiences, and also, of course, there had to be some romance in it because that's what I love to read, and I was writing romance, so I knew there was going to be some romance, storylines in there as well. But for the most part, it definitely was inspired by my upbringing and my family's experiences.
Yeah, I love that. This probably won't come as a surprise to you, but we have a lot of staff members who love romances. So they're like, do you know what her pen name is? So we'll get to that part in a little bit. It's interesting that you say, one of the things I love about what you just said is that you really didn't start writing like with a purpose until you were 40. I'm sure you already know this, but one of my favorite and one of the most prolific writers in the world has now passed on, but Toni Morrison also wrote her first book, The Bluest Eye, at age 40. And what I love about that story, and that is that it really just resonates with me that there is no age limit to do what you want to do or what you're called to do. And I think that's really inspiring about you and your story, because as I mentioned, and as you mentioned, this was your first novel, but you went on to write other novels under a pen name, but you came back to this one. Yes. So all of those, I'm making the assumption that all of those have been written since you've been 40 and beyond, right?
Yes.
Fantastic.
And I really think with this book, this wasn't a book that I could write in my 20s. I think I needed to live a little and have some experiences. So I really think it was just, it took it took several years to get it published, for me to find an agent. And I think that's just what maybe was meant to happen, because it was just, this is the right time for this book. So,
and I'll get to the whole publishing thing in a little bit, but let me ask you, during that time, I don't know, however many years, you don't have to tell us how old you are, that is for you to share if you want, but did you find yourself going back and forth and like editing the book as the years went by and like sort of maybe maturing your characters or anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. So I don't mind sharing. So I started writing Big Chicas probably 2011, 2012. Okay. So I probably finished, like actually had a complete manuscript in maybe 2019, 2018.
Okay.
So definitely the book evolved. Some characters' names changed, some little plot lines changed. And I think it was just me trying to maybe get comfortable with the story enough, because I had this idea in my head, but again, I was still, a new writer. I wasn't sure how to connect all those threads or how to get what was in my head, onto the page. So yeah, definitely the book, took different paths before it was finally finished and before it was finally published.
So of course I'm going off script, Annette. You'll get to know that about me a little bit. I'm curious, like your writing process. Are you a computer person in that you type it all out, or are you a longhand? Do you have your own shorthand? I'm curious about your process.
I'm definitely a computer person. I do keep notes when I'm working on a book. And maybe my notes might be in a notebook or in a journal, just because since I work a full-time job, I'll keep the notebook with me, and if something comes to me, but then I'll go home and I'll put it into the computer.
You'll transcribe your
Yes.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting to note. I know it may not be a surprise to you. I know a lot of writers, and every time I ask them this question, they have so many different and varying processes for getting the stories out of their brain and onto paper or computer, as it were.
Yes.
Okay, I'm back on script, Annette.
Okay.
So Big Chicas Don't Cry offers a beautiful portrayal of a multi-generational family. This is a multi-part question. Let's start with this one. How many adults who will read this let me start that over. Many adults who will read this novel were raised with or close to their grandparents or extended family. And there may be some experiences of theirs reflected in these pages. What do you see your story offering to those individuals who grew up in these multi-generational families? And I think that's very true for LA County generally.
Well, I really think it's a glimpse into their childhood. It's a glimpse into, or maybe it's going to bring back some memories of holidays spent with their larger extended family. It's going to remind them of, those close personal relationships you have with maybe cousins, maybe, siblings, just where not only are you related by blood, but you're also friends. So I would hope that's what they would see in the book.
That's actually really great. I think one of the chapters I read was it was exactly what you just said. It's like I immediately went back to something that happened with me and a cousin or two of mine, and was able to really sort of connect to that like kinship that you have, where for a lot of us, your cousins are like your siblings, right?
Yep. And they're also your first best friends, because they're who you grow up with. And especially if you're close in age, and so I was fortunate to have cousins I'm the oldest on both sides of my family, but I had cousins who were, right below me. And so we were, there was like a cluster of us who were around the same age at the same time. And so we grew up together. And so, yeah, we were each other's first best friends.
I like that. So my cousins were my first best friends. I think I see a t-shirt in there someplace. Okay, so how do you think Hispanic women have found it traditionally challenging? I beg your pardon. Why do you think Hispanic women have found it traditionally challenging to use their voice?
I think in the Latin culture historically, there's something called machismo, where the man is the man of the house and the woman is there to serve him, literally sometimes, make his food, make his plate, and also figuratively not to question his decisions. But at the same time, kind of paradoxically, in Latin households, the women are expected to be strong and to take care of everybody, to make sure everybody is healthy, happy, and in a way that kind of ties into the title of the book, that women historically in Latin households don't cry. You don't have time to cry, because you got to take care of everybody else first. And so I think maybe that's why traditionally Latin women, wives, mothers have found it hard to speak up, because they were taught not to, and to just quietly take care of everything. Right?
But take care of everything.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's an interesting statement, because while I can completely understand this idea of the women, historically serving the male or the head of household, or however you want to call it, it's really the way that you just described it really shows the strength, the silent strength of the female, of the woman or the matriarch in the family.
Right.
And so while traditionally, as you're saying, women are to take care of the men, she's taking care of the entire family. And so there's a lot of power in that as well, yes. I would imagine.
Yes,
do you see that this has changed at all for our younger generation of Latinas?
Oh, definitely. I think younger Latinas, they see maybe, their mothers, and their grandmothers in this role, and either they don't like it, and so they're not going to let somebody, some man or partner do that to them, or they will take maybe a lesson in how you have to be strong, but don't be silent anymore. You can still be strong, you can still speak out, stand up for yourself. And I think that's just in general, in the generation of the girls that are growing up right now, that's what they're learning. They're learning that their voice can be heard and deserves to be heard. And, they can do something with that now. And they're not afraid to speak their mind.
That's actually a really great segue into our next question, because obviously, as you've mentioned, many stories that focus on families who have immigrated to the States really deal with the culture clash. And so what I hear is really addressing sort of the culture clash of the younger female generation in comparison to the older female generation. So although you highlight some of the generational differences that would lead to conflict, for example, the cousins' varying levels of inability to converse in Spanish came up in the book. These generational conflicts are largely absent from the story. And the reason we're asking this question is something that you said earlier. You're like, well, I write what I know. So how do you see those two things, like one, writing what you know, but also really keeping sort of that cultural, the clashes sort of absent from this book?
I think one of the reasons maybe they're absent is because for me, when I set out to write this story, it was more for me to be about the relationship between the cousins. And the family was kind of, surrounding them. And yes, you see glimpses of interaction with their mothers or their fathers. But the core relationship was always going to be between the cousins. And though that story, the conflict was, it's different. It's different just in terms of, just finding a way back to each other for the cousins who are estranged, and also just their own internal struggles with either their careers or with their romance partners. So for me, that was going to be the center of the story. That was the story. And then based on my upbringing and my family, then I sprinkled in, some of the interactions or experiences that I've had with my aunts or with my mother, with my grandmothers. So, but yeah, at the core of the story is the relationship between the four cousins.
Yeah, I like the part of the story where you have, I think, 3 of the 4 cousins in helping with the tamales, and you have the mother coming in, you have the grandmother, then the auntie, and there's all these like sort of cross sections of conversations, and it was so familiar to me, of just having that big group of women just kind of intersecting and interacting with each other. I loved it. So here it says, so you devoted chapter 7 to Selena and her experiences and feelings about being hired as a token Latina in her company. I'm sure many of us on the call can identify with this particular character. Many generalizations and stereotypes are assigned to her from her co-workers. Did this play a role in inspiring you to create the character that was not largely defined by her Mexican heritage?
Yes, so specifically with Selena, that was going to be part of her journey. Am I Mexican enough, or am I white enough to be accepted by others? And I definitely wanted to showcase that struggle, because I think that is something that first generation, second generation Latina women and the Latino men face. And I think especially when you look the way I look, there's going to be certain assumptions, and it's on both sides. So I look like I speak Spanish, but I'm not fluent. I can manage a conversation, but once you start with the big words or you start talking fast, I gotta pay attention. But I did have experiences where the person who was speaking Spanish to me was offended that I could not respond in Spanish. I have a relative who was in a very non-diverse office environment, and they assumed that she also, she spoke for all Mexicans just because she was Mexican American. So I definitely wanted to showcase that struggle, and not so much because I wanted to make a statement, about this, but more to show that, someone's what we call Latinidad can't be erased by outsiders. It can only be erased internally. So if you don't feel that you're Mexican enough or Spanish enough, then that's on you. And if you don't want to feel like that, then yes, you should, try to be, or support your heritage by accepting where you're from. So that was a purposeful decision.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. That was a great example of, I think, a lot of people, frankly, who through their own inherent bias assume that everyone who is Hispanic or Latino or Latinx speaks Spanish. And it's one of those things where we have an opportunity, I think, to course correct ourselves, all of ourselves, because you put that very nicely, that it goes both ways. It's on both sides of the coin. And that did come up at one part in your book. I'm trying to recall exactly where the main character is dating a young man, and he makes these sort of inferences about her being a Latina and kind of being with her because she's Latina, right? So going again with that sort of exotification and that bias that happens through different communities that you find yourself in and out, weaving in and out of. So I do appreciate what you're saying there about just reminding me to have that level of awareness of my own assumptions when I'm speaking to someone who's from a different culture. So this one is great, and because it's dinner time, I think it's a great question to ask you. There are lots of scenes with comfort cooking and comfort food. Is this something that comes out of your own experience? Food is a center for many cultures, and is historically been a way to bring people together. So let's talk about food.
Great. I think for me, one of the ways I'm comfortable showcasing my Mexican American heritage is through food, because I think that's something that's familiar to most people. Most people can relate to certain dishes. Maybe you haven't tasted, every single Mexican dish out there, but there's some things that, are just familiar to everybody. And it definitely comes from my own family. Like I said, we're a big family. And so whenever we get together, there's a lot of food involved. And the inside in the book, there's the opening scene, and it's also the closing scene of the making of the tamales, and that is a tradition brought from my family. We make tamales on the morning of Christmas Eve, and so I think for me that's also how I connect to my culture. I love cooking, and I love trying different recipes. And when I was learning, I would call up my grandma, I would call up my dad to, okay, so how many, how much chili am I supposed to put in again? How much onion? So for me, that's how I connect, and how I hope my readers connect as well.
I love that. It reminds me of, I think maybe within some of the Black tradition, calling up your grandmother and getting her recipe for sweet potato pie, which I ruin every year, by the way, because I am not a cook. I leave that to the people who are better at it. So I know that this is not a true story, but it's based on your family. Is your family still making tamales during Christmas season?
Yes. We had to pause for COVID, but in our individual homes, we did, and but it wasn't the same. I think it's better when everybody's together, and I've attempted to make tamales on my own, and they just don't taste like my mom's. They don't taste like my grandma's. So
That's
for
right.
me, it's better to be in the room with them, watching them and learning.
That's right. The kids would say it hits different, right?
Yes.
I would say that that's
does.
true.
Yes, it does.
So you have to forgive me. I have to ask this question. I promise you it's not mine, but somebody on my staff wants to know if you will share your masa recipe.
Oh. I would if I thought that it was good, because unfortunately, I don't have the actual written down recipe.
It's all from memory.
It's from memory, and also, like I mentioned before, it just I to this day I just think that my grandma, she maybe kept a little something
Always.
so, and with masa, it's just so sensitive. So if you don't know the correct consistency, you don't know the correct taste, it just doesn't taste the same. So I would share it, but I don't think anybody would want to make my recipe.
So you taste it, and you keep adding until it tastes right. Basically, right?
And it feels right. It has to feel right. I don't know how to describe that.
So, unless you're just in the room, right? Like
Right.
you know when
Exactly.
when it's ready.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. And I certainly see that akin to sweet potato pie. Okay, Skye, back to the to the questions. Just a couple of more, because I want to have an opportunity to bring in some of our customers here.
Sure.
So I think this one's a great question here. So your novel brought to mind for a lot of us, and certainly myself included, the Joy Luck Club, Amy Tan, 1989, which focuses on complex relationships with mothers and their first generation Chinese American daughters. So there's 30 years apart from your book and the Joy Luck Club, but they are both about how families endure cultural conflicts and generational differences. Do you think it's become easier in the last 30 years in this realm for Mexican American daughters, or do you think it's harder? I'm sure you read that one. I mean, I think we all read that one. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's easier. There are still roadblocks, there are still challenges, but I think for my mom's generation, it was more about assimilating, and maybe you weren't as proud or boastful of your Mexican, the Mexican part of you, right? And because there was a lot of trauma, I think, in her generation, especially.
Right.
And then also with my dad coming here, not knowing the language, and his focus was learning English. So he was going to school to learn English. So that's why English was the main language spoken in our household, but there was still enough Spanish where you pick it up, obviously. So I think the younger generation, so I have two daughters. I have a 25-year-old and a 15-year-old. And I think for this generation, it's more, I don't know if acceptable is the right word, but it's just more, oh, you're Mexican. Okay. It's nothing. It's not, but I will say, of course, that's not true for everybody. It's probably because of, different environments. And of course, there's still racism out there, and there are still people who assume by the color of your skin that you're not American enough. But I definitely do think that it is easier. It's easier right now, I think, to find your community, because it is becoming more, let's be proud of where we came from. Let's be proud of our heritage, like Hispanic Heritage Month. And I think that's opening the doors for the younger generation to see that they don't need to be hiding behind them anymore.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. There's like this, in some ways, acceptance for pluralistic communities, like dualistic communities, where you can be American and you can be Latinx or Hispanic or African American. One of the questions I had when you were talking, just thinking about your mother and your father and their experiences during that time. I know for the African American community, and I understand for many of the Asian cultures, colorism is still a big thing. Do you think that is true for Hispanic Latino communities, where the lighter your skin, the more accepted you are, or the darker your skin, the less accepted? Is that something that you witnessed in the Latino Hispanic community?
Yes. So I do think, there's something called white passing for in different communities of color. And it is, it has been shown that the lighter your skin, the more accepted you may be in communities which are predominantly white. So in my family, we have, different range of skin colors. And there are, I do have cousins who don't look that they are Mexican. And I'm married to a Mexican American man, but he has green eyes and he has very, very pale skin. So he's often mistaken for Caucasian. So I do see that is still an issue. And, there's not so much even the color of your skin, but also, your speech, your, what you like to eat, so I think people who have a darker color maybe face more, or no, they face more barriers, I think, and obstacles and judgment. Definitely. And I do think also, even within the Latin communities, people who have darker skin maybe are not accepted as open or as much as the Latinos who have, the caramel color skin, or, cream colors, light color skin. So I do think that is still definitely an issue that is facing us.
Still today. Well, I definitely think the kids are changing our minds and making us think about some of these ways and these social mores and historical ways of viewing the world. They're really making us think about it, which is why I brought that question up. It was a conversation I had with a younger person recently. Okay, back to your book. Writing Big Chicas Don't Cry. Actually, my question says before you wrote, but you've already clarified for me, but Big Chicas Don't Cry is your first book, and you wrote and co-authored several romance novels, such as Delicious Temptation, Second Chance at Rancho Lindo, a holiday romance anthology under the pseudonym Sabrina's Soul. Can you talk to our audience a little bit about some of the challenges or maybe opportunities you face with the publishing industry, trying to get your book published with strong Latina heroines?
Sure. So I'll just clarify a little bit further. So yes, Big Chicas Don't Cry was the first book that I tried to write, but romance is actually when I was published.
I see. Gotcha.
Yes,
Thank you for that clarification.
yes. So so as Sabrina Soul, I published romance, full-length novels and novellas, but in all of my books, my heroines are Latina. And that was something that I made a deliberate choice when I was first starting out.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, as I mentioned before, it was hard. It would have been more hard, I guess, to not make them Latina, because their experiences with their families and just in general is going to have that, it's going to be colored by that, by my experiences as a Latina. So I think some of the challenges that I've faced in having characters who are Mexican American or other some other Hispanic culture. One is I do put Spanish in my books. It's not a lot.
Okay.
But that's my upbringing, where it's Spanglish. Spanglish, using some words in Spanish, some words in English. So yes, I would get criticisms, why are you putting Spanish in your books? I don't understand Spanish. Even with Big Chicas Don't Cry. I've heard that as well. It takes me out of the story if I have to go look up, this word. But I always try to make sure when I am using some Spanish that the context of what is, being told or read, that you're not going to really have to go and Google, what this word means. But that's my goal, is when I am inserting Spanish, that it's in a conversation where once you read the whole conversation together, you pretty much get the idea of what
makes sense.
Yes. And I never, use like big blocks of Spanish, because again, I know, I'm not a fluent speaker. So why would I put big conversations in Spanish? But I do, I do use Spanglish here and there. So that's
do you get criticism from Latino and or Latinx communities about using Spanglish?
I haven't. No.
Okay.
I think
good to hear.
Yeah, I think for maybe for my readers, that's a common thing. And I think that's more common maybe than reading, full length book in Spanish. So it's familiar. It's familiar to them, and they can relate to that.
So, Annette, I want to ask you one more question, because I want to get to our questions from our audience. I ask every single person this question.
Okay.
What are you reading?
So I am very blessed that I have a lot of author friends, and specifically a lot of Latina author friends. And so, because I'm actually on a deadline, I'm finishing up a different book. I can't be reading as much as I want, but I always make time to read my friends' books. So, and then I'm lucky enough to get, advanced copies before the book is going to come out. So I just finished the Neapolitan Sisters by Margo Candela. She's another Latina women's fiction author, and her story is about three sisters. So it was kind of I'm like, yes, I need to read that, because definitely it's, if you read Big Chicas Don't Cry, you're probably going to want to read Margo's book, and vice versa. So I just finished that book, and I'm getting ready to read ARC, so an advanced copy of Kiss Me Catalina, and this is by Priscilla Oliveras. This is a romance, and it's actually a retelling of Taming the Shrew, and it's it's the second book in her I just call them the Mariachi Sisters, because they're a group of foster sisters who are in an all-girl mariachi band. And so the first book was called West Side Love Story. So that was Romeo and Juliet retelling. And so now Kiss Me Catalina is the next book she has coming out in November. And so I'm just starting that one too. So that's what I'm reading.
I don't think I've ever seen a female mariachi player. Once you said that, I started going back through my memory. I don't think I've ever seen, let alone all-female mariachi band. So interesting.
Yes.
Annette, thank you so much for this conversation. I have thoroughly enjoyed myself. I've learned quite a bit about you and your process. I've loved this book so far. Thank you so much. I want to turn you over to Daniel so that we can ask questions from our audience. Daniel, do you want to come back on?
One of the questions is, what was the transition like going from writing romance novels to women's fiction? Was there a big change? Maybe?
Yeah, it was definitely a big change in that, you know, when you're writing romance, the one rule of writing romance is that there has to be a happily ever after at the end. The couple, the throuple, whatever, needs to be together at the end. Nobody can die, right? Nobody can die. They have to be together. So women's fiction is more of the main character's journey into kind of discovering herself, going after her dreams, standing up for herself. And so for me, because I had 4 main characters, I knew pretty early on that they were not all going to get happily ever after. And so that was, for me, a little bit challenging because, you know, like I said, I'm a big romance reader. I write romance. So of course, I want all my characters to find love at the end, but I just had to remind myself that was not this story. This story was about the relationship with the cousins, together and individually in their own lives, and rediscovering their family.
Is it, this just occurs to me, is it more freeing, a lot more freeing to write that way versus the formula for romance, or?
I think they both have their challenges, because I think romance is because you are having to make sure that this couple, or, you know, whatever iteration, not only finds love and perseveres and ends up together, but you need to have all these outside forces, right, trying to tear them apart. So that is a challenge, you know, to come up with, you know, these obstacles that they need to overcome. And it has to be believable, you know, it has to be believable by the end that they want to be together, and the reader has to believe that they want to be together and they're going to be together. So yeah, for women's fiction, it was a little bit more freeing that I wasn't tied to that ending, but it's also more introspective. It's a deeper point of view, because you're in the character's head more, and so it's definitely, you know, you can't be, every scene doesn't have to be dialogue, you know, where you're getting the story out in conversation with somebody else. It's more the thoughts and the beliefs of the character in their own mind. So,
Annette, you made me think of another question. Didn't mean to jump in here again, Daniel, but I have not read any of your romance, and I haven't seen the book cover. I know with book covers, there's like this historical, like, you know, sort of love scene, you know, the Fabio type. I'm totally making that up. I don't know if that's true. On your book covers, do you have characters who represent as Hispanic Latino and Latina?
Yeah. So the Fabio romance is, you know, gone away.
You see, I just aged myself, Annette.
So yeah, so the romance covers these days, they're so different. There's illustrated covers, there's covers, you know, with, yes, a couple maybe in an embrace, or there's, you know, just covers with just the hero. And actually, I'm actually was very, very happy with my next romance book that is coming out in November. It's called Second Chance at Rancho Lindo, and it's a new series about Mexican American cowboys who live and work on their family's ranch. And this was the first time that a publisher actually told me, we are going to do a custom cover shoot and we're going to make sure that the model has Mexican American heritage. And so I was just so excited for that. And so yes, so those books definitely, because I just saw a cover for the second book in that series. And yes, they did it again. They went after a Mexican American model. And then my earlier books, some of them actually got new covers.
I see, to update
and so
them.
they updated them, and they did. It was more of a purposeful search for models who, I don't know if they were Mexican, but you know, they could be.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a resident expert, and I do mean expert. I mean, she reads hundreds of books a year, and her favorite genre is romance. She actually is our collection development manager. She's in the chat saying we call that the clinch cover. Yes. I'm not sure if I know what that means, but I think the two of you should, the two of you should definitely have a conversation at some point. Okay, Daniel, turning it back over to you.
That's a wonderful conversation. One of the questions is, why did you take on a pen name? Was it easier to get published?
So I was published first in romance, and I actually hadn't really even thought about, pen name or anything until I had already got the contract. And I had a friend who was already published in romance, and also, again, I was a big reader, and I was starting to also be an active member of the romance writing community. And I just saw that was just something that was common, to have a pen name. And it was also, it's kind of a unique experience to get the opportunity to create a new persona, and come up with your own name, and choose your own name. And so for me, it was more, one, it was just something that was common in the genre, was to use a pen name. And two, just because, I just thought it would be fun.
And a little follow-up from me on that one. The name you chose, is there any secret behind it, or did it remind you of something, or did it just sound good to you? Or
I think when I was trying to come up with different names, I always liked the name Sabrina. And I just thought, okay, so if I have Sabrina, I have to have a last name that's also an S, just so it'd be more memorable. So and I wanted also to make sure, that people knew that I was a Latina author. So I wanted to use a surname that was a Spanish word. So that's how I came up with that.
Okay, let's see. Well, you have some really great comments too.
Oh, okay.
Someone was saying that they hated making tamales when they were a kid, but looking back, it was some of the best memories that they had. And I'm going to save this one for last. But here's another question. Do you ever have any hesitations that you might get backlash from family members thinking that your stories were too close to home, or that they see themselves in your stories?
Yeah, it's funny because so there's 17 of us first cousins on my mom's side. And so I'm the oldest, and then 20, there's we have a range of ages. But now that we're all adults, we're on different text message threads and Facebook groups or whatever. We're talking that way. And everybody knew I was working on this book. And I would always call the book the cousins book, just because, it was going to be about 4 cousins. So yes, the assumption was I'm writing about them. I'm writing about their experiences. And they wanted to know which cousin was based on which character, or which character was based on which cousin. And, a couple of them would even, mention to me, how did you know that happened to me? And I'll be like, I didn't know that happened to you. I just made that up. So yeah, so I mean, it's all, they're teasing, and it's all in good fun. And I think they're satisfied that no secrets were spilled.
Good. That's a plus, I guess. Yeah. We're gonna run out of time, but I have a couple things. Let's see. What is the key message or life lesson you would like for the reader to take away from Big Chicas Don't Cry?
I think it's that that family comes first, but I don't want people to think that I just mean, blood family. It's also found family. It could be friendships that seem like family, but just that even if, there's different issues that happen in life, people make mistakes. Some of those mistakes obviously maybe are beyond repair, beyond forgiveness. But if you really have that community of family or friends to lean on, I think you definitely should try and hold on to it, as long as they deserve it. I want to preface it.
I read most of your book, and it really came through to me. I really felt that a lot, and I really think you did capture the Latino family quite well. When I look back on my family. So we're kind of out of time, but I wanted to leave you with this comment, which is wonderful. Let me see. This person says, "Do you realize how phenomenal this is? You telling our stories? I'm loving your book, Big Chicas Don't Cry, and I relate to it. I relate to it so much. Oh, I relate to so much in it. I'm sharing it with my sisters." So, in spite of the fact that I messed up what it was saying, that's a really nice comment.
Thank you.
And I guess we're out of time. Boy, this has been really, really great. And I thank both of you guys so much for coming together and sharing your stories and your insights. And yes, that will be it.
I'm gonna wrap it for us, Daniel.
Yeah, okay, good idea.
I see you kind of struggling here. Let me help out a little bit. I just again want to say thank you to Annette. You've been so open. I was thinking when we started this conversation, as we got into our groove, we should have been eating, right? We should have been eating and having this very sort of communal experience. I'm gonna put that on a pin, put a pin on that for another conversation with my team. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. I'm so happy that we could bring you and invite you in for this last bit of the month. A local author, pretty local, and we want to continue to do these programs. So for all of you who are listening, if you have ideas of authors that you think, I want Skye Patrick to interview them, please send them to us. We'll do our best to get them in. Obviously, we have all of her books at our libraries. Please check them out, either in full copy, I should say paper copy, or digitally. I'm sure she would like you to buy them. So maybe you check out one and then buy another one. Again, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us. And this is the wrap up of Hand in Heart.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everyone.